Oh, hello! My name is Mara, and welcome to Books Like Whoa. Okay, so we are well into the end of the year wrap-up that I am doing. We are doing some best, we're doing some worst, mostly worst today, and just sort of reflecting on my year of reading in general. So I decided to go ahead and do my worst books of 2018 kind of towards the beginning of this, because I just sort of want to get negativity or whatever out of the way and say like, hey, here are the worst things I read this year. Do with that what you will, and then let's move into some like more bests and disappointment kind of things. So today we're going to talk about the 10 worst books I read, and when I say worst, I genuinely mean I feel like these were the like either the worst written, worst in their genre, just like I think that every book on this is a bad book. That being said, of course it's a subjective opinion. I think that based on the ratings I've seen, I don't think really any of these are too controversial in terms of, I think that there's very few people who would passionately dispute with me on any of these. And then I do also just want to mention that in my best and worst videos for my different genre lists that I'm going to be doing starting I think on Friday, I am going to talk about like my favorites in each genre, and then I'm going to talk about disappointments which are not going to make it onto this list. Those are books that personally didn't work for me, but that I didn't necessarily think were like objectively terrible. It just, for me, for whatever reason, I didn't particularly like it or think it was a great example of its genre. So somewhat subtle distinction, but anyway, all that to say, today we're talking about the top 10 books that I think are just like qualitatively the ones that were the worst that I read this year. So you know what? Let's just dive right in. Okay, so number 10 is Party Girls Die in Pearls by, I believe, Plum Sky. Gonna guess that's a nom de plume. This book just did not work for me in terms of the authorial voice, and it's a book that I thought that I would like because it's like a mystery, like a murder mystery set at Oxford. Like that's a setting that I thought I would enjoy. But the tone of the book just felt very self-satisfied and like self-smirky in a way that I could not get down with. This was a DNF for me. There was also footnotes, and I was like, girlfriend, David Foster Wallace, you are not. This is not contributing to anything in the story that is positive. I couldn't get through it, and I could see, it's one that I do think is bad, but I could see, because it's commercial fiction, who might enjoy this. For me, it just, if you're not having fun in a commercial fiction book, which will be a recurring theme on this list, by the way, what are you doing? It's time to move on. So that's why this is number 10. I got, I think, about 150 pages in and then like bailed. Number 9 is my other DNF on this list, and this is a book that I decided to put as even worse than Party Girls Die in Pearls because I tried, I'm gonna say like 4 times to get through this book and failed every time. That was Artemis by Andy Weir. I just didn't think this was successful. This is a sci-fi novel. This was my first attempt with Andy Weir, and nothing about the voice connected with me. I thought the characters were weird. The plot wasn't compelling. I tried my trick because I got probably, I don't know, maybe like 100, 200 pages, something into it. And sometimes if I'm not enjoying things, I'll skip ahead and read the last couple chapters to see if I'm gonna like it or if it'll get better for me. And this was an example where I did that, and it was like, oh no, this is no better. So I DNF'd on this one, and this is one I've heard several people talking about as a book that they had a hard time with or didn't enjoy. So I don't think that's a unique opinion, but yeah, I DNF'd this one, and that is why it's my number 9. So number 8 are two, I'm putting 2 together because these are the 2 books that convinced me that I'm no longer going to continue actively reading in the Argent Vampire series by Lynsay Sands, and that was Twice Bitten and Vampires Like It Hot. Now, the Argent Vampire series has been one of my go-to like campy paranormal romance that doesn't take itself too seriously. It has a very light tone. It's nothing like groundbreaking or amazing, but like it's a kind of paranormal romance that I really enjoy, which is self-aware and like knows what it is and leans into it. I should just also mention that we are now well into like the late 20s of this series. So this is a very long running series that in my opinion essentially has run its course. What I've noticed in the last few books is that Lynsay Sands is trying to take that self-awareness and campiness and apply it to certain problematic tropes and subvert them, which I think is an interesting project for a book of this tone to try. And in my most surprising books of the year, we'll talk about an example where she did that I thought was successful. But the last 2 she attempted to do this with, And I just don't think she fully confronted the implications of how horrifying the situation she was setting up were. So in one case, it was essentially exploring the fact that in a lot of vampire books, there's some level of mind control happening. And there was an element of the female, the heroine, being controlled for like actual literal decades by her mother, who's also a vampire. And I think that there was lip service paid to how terrible that was, but I didn't think that the actual situation fully played out the way it needed to address that. And the romance involved was like so inert and like just completely didn't work for me. The other one was trying to explore this idea of fated mates, which is a big thing in paranormal romance. And I think she was trying to explore the idea of like, well, what would happen if two different people thought that somebody was their fated mate? Like, how would you negotiate that? And again, I just felt like she was trying to kind of play with that, but I felt like the implications of how horrifying consent issues in this were not played out. So, and the romance didn't work for me again. So I think what I've concluded is like, I think it's interesting she's trying this experiment. I don't think at this point it's really working for me. And what I enjoy about this, which is like the bigger world, all the relationships that have built up over the years, yada, 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 that's also not really working for me at this point. So I gave these books, I think, 2.5 and 2 stars. I'm just gonna go ahead and say that I'm not reading these anymore, or I'm not reading when they first come out, I should say. Like, I'll keep my eye on it because it's like brain candy that I really enjoy, and I would like to find ones that I still like in that series. But I'm gonna assume from now on that I should like see if I like the tropes being played with, and if so, maybe try to get it from the library eventually, but like, I'm not gonna just like be trying to get them when they first come out. So those two together are my number 8. Number 7 is The Passage by Justin Cronin. This is a book I buddy read with Dane Reeds, and neither of us liked this. Like, I think this took Dane like literal months to get through because he was so bored. I think he made it his bedtime book, and it actually just kept putting him to sleep, / he just couldn't get through it. And I don't blame him because this was a honkin' long book. I think it was 700 or 800 pages. It was overwritten. It's supposed to be literary, vampire, post-apocalyptic, whatever. I didn't get the literary. I didn't enjoy the vampire. I didn't enjoy the post-apocalyptic. It wasn't like the worst thing I've ever read, but it was very overhyped. And I just don't think that as a book it came together. When I read the synopsis for the trilogy as a whole, I also don't think as a trilogy this really sounds like it was going to come together. So like all around, at the time, I think I gave it a 2.5. And I think in retrospect, I'd probably bump that back down to 2. It just wasn't, I just think that this is not a very good book. Like, honestly, that's what it boils down to. And it is so talked about as like, oh, it's a literary, like a great literary post-apocalyptic whatever. I'm just not impressed. I didn't enjoy my time reading it. And considering how long it is to not enjoy your time reading it is a problem. I would have 100% DNF'd this if it hadn't been a buddy read. So that's why it's my number 7. Number 6 is #murdertrending by Gretchen McNeil. This was a book that had a really interesting premise, which is why I picked it up. And when I started reading it, I remembered, oh yeah, I tried to read another book from her with an interesting premise, which was a middle grade retelling of And Then There Were None, which is one of my all-time favorite books, and didn't like the writing in that one and couldn't get through it. I did get through this one, but it was like, I'm just gonna say, this is a really badly written book. And I think the reason I put it at number 6 is because it's not only badly written, but also tonally, it's a little off-putting to me because it's essentially like positing a near future kind of dystopia situation where if you commit a crime, your punishment is you get put on this like reality TV show, which is Alcatraz Island, but populated by serial murderers, and you are serially murdered on like the internet for people to watch. So it's a very interesting premise, but for such a dark premise, I felt like how flippant the tone was did not connect with me. Like, it didn't feel successfully darkly comedic, which is what I think the author was going for, but frankly, just because I'm not sure she's that great of a writer, at least in my opinion, it just didn't really come together. So yeah, I felt like this was genuinely not a very good book, like not well written, and kind of bummed me out because it's an interesting premise, and I think she was trying to make a lot of commentary on our society, which is what a lot of dystopia tries to do. That I was interested in, but I don't think it really played out to its fullest potential, and just generally, the elements did not come together for me on this one. Number 5 is RoseBlood by A.G. Howard. So I did an entire reading vlog of reading this particular book, so I will mostly refer you to that for my thoughts. Basically, I don't know that I'm surprised that this wasn't good, but like, girl, this wasn't good. So it's a Phantom of the Opera retelling / like continuation of, and I think this book was unsuccessful on pretty much every level. That being said, for like YA paranormal, I would say that this is maybe, like, I think I ultimately decided I like this better than Twilight, because at least the parts of it that were problematic, the author knew they were problematic and did not romanticize, which I appreciated. I mean, the premise was more unique. Like, it was a more interesting take than a lot of paranormal, like YA paranormal romances I've read. So that also I'll give it, but it was 2 stars. It wasn't good. Like, it wasn't good. That's what it boils down to, which is why it's number, what, like 5? Yeah, it's number 5 on this list, and would not particularly recommend it. So number 4, I just realized that all of these top 5 I have reading vlogs for that you can go watch. So number 4 was a part of my bookstore picks my TBR when I did a blind date with a book this summer. So it was my one that I wasn't totally sure I was gonna like going in. And I would say objectively, the reason it's number 4 is because objectively, this is one of the worst books I've ever read. I will say I didn't have like the worst time reading this because I was basically hate reading it for the most part. But that was Rogue Stallion by Diana Palmer. So this wasn't necessarily disappointing because I wasn't expecting to like it, though I was disappointed that it was called Rogue Stallion and there was no cowgirl sex scene to be found in this book. And sex in general in that book was treated very weirdly. Like, you finally get a little, like, there's a lot of hinting and teasing, and then, I mean, it was written in the early 90s, and it's a very early 90s book, basically, when it comes to the sex and, like, sexual... Anyway, you can watch my whole reading vlog on that. I had a lot of thoughts. But basically, this is really not a good book. It wasn't terribly written. Like, it was... in terms of, like, on a technical level, Diana Palmer is a perfectly proficient author. Like, better, frankly, than maybe, like, RoseBlood or #murdertrending, but like, it's a very mid-90s romance, so there's a lot of problematic elements to it, and I really just couldn't get on board. Like, the part where I was like, this is terrible, was when the hero basically like breaks up and like humiliates the heroine because a week into their relationship she has not yet disclosed to him that she is infertile, or at least believes herself to be infertile, / like he completely handles her past sexual abuse in a way that was like just unforgivable to me. There was a big grovel towards the end, so like I could tell what the author was trying to do, but anyway, all that to say, this book was just not good. And so I gave it 1.5 stars, and that is why it's number 4. But believe it or not, we got an Agatha Christie up next that I liked even less. So we're in the top 3, and I just realized that all 3 of these were a part of my reading the lowest rated books on my Goodreads TBR challenge. So like, further cementing my lesson that like, if a book is rated really low on Goodreads, like, that is a reason for pause, because all 3 of these were rated. The one I'm about to talk about had under 3 stars, and the other 2 were right around 3 stars, which for Goodreads is very low. So, number 3, as I said, is an Agatha Christie, and that is Passenger to Frankfurt. Yeah, like, this is the worst Agatha Christie I've ever read. It was written late in her life, and you can tell. It is ostensibly sort of like an action mystery thrillery type thing. Doesn't really succeed in doing that well. She has several books like this in her oeuvre, but the ones that are earlier on in her career, I think I just sort of excuse as being sort of like campy, rompy fun from the 30s kind of a thing. But like, by the time it's the 70s, it just doesn't work as, it doesn't feel as campy, I guess, by then. And so I can't enjoy it really. It just wasn't good. It didn't come together really at all, and I can totally see why it has under, I think it's like 2.9 something is its average rating, and like, girl, it deserves it. I gave it a 1.5, and it's the worst Agatha Christie I've ever read, and considering she's my favorite author, like, that says something. Number 2, I decided to go with Death at Breakfast by Beth Gutcheon. The reason I decided to put this so high up, I mean, it's a 1.5 star, so that's part of it, but the reason I put it at number 2 is because there are 2 reasons. One is that based on the cover, I think the expectation set by the way that this is kind of marketed and presented is that this is higher order commercial fiction. So you're not expecting from the physical, from the way this book is marketed for it to be so pulpy, which it certainly is. The other reason is just that this is maybe one of the most boring commercial fiction mysteries I have ever read. And the only reason pulpy fiction exists is to entertain you. And I was just completely unentertained. I thought the other thing is that the writing in this was not good. Like, the sentence structures were really weird, which I went into in my reading blog I did on this. The sentence structure was really weird. And then I also just felt like there was 0 subtext. Everything was at a textual level, and the text was boring. So like, there was 0 thematic content in this for me to get on board with. it wasn't entertaining. It was not well written. It didn't have any like thematic interest. The characters were not, like, there was just nothing to recommend this book, basically. Like, this is one of the most boring books I've ever read. And one of the biggest just like failures as a book I've ever read. Like, this fails so hard in pretty much every way possible. Okay, and then we come to it, the worst book of the year. Like, unquestionably the worst book of the year. I said it at the time when I read it, like, this is my worst book of the year, and I stand by that because that was pretty short time ago, so there wasn't a lot of opportunity for something to unseat it. But that was Winter at Death's Hotel by Kenneth Cameron, which is a historical mystery, basically. This book was terrible, like, really terrible. In terms of like the historical fiction piece of it, it was not well written. Like, it wasn't bad, like, it was competently written, but part of historical fiction to me is some level of beauty or lyricism in the prose to kind of get you in the vibe of the historical time period. So that wasn't there. The mystery was not good, like, it was not well executed, and the ending of the mystery was so unsatisfying and such bullshit. Like, it was bad. And then, so like, it wasn't good as a book. It was not good as a book, and then it was also just one of the most problematic books I've read in a very long time in terms of the misogyny, in terms of violence and aggression towards women, the way it handled gay characters. Like, it was problematic and badly written. So like, you put those two things together, you get a really bad book. This is a really bad book, and it was unquestionably the worst book that I read this year. I would not recommend it to anyone. I think that there's so many other historical mysteries that would be more interesting or more entertaining. For instance, The Witch of Willow Hall by Hester Fox, I thought was a better historical mystery this year. The Phantom Tree by Nicola Cornick had a lot of fun. It's like a kind of a time travel-y, like, there's a little bit of a fantasy element to it, but it's really kind of a historical mystery. Arturo Revert Perez is kind of a historical mystery type author that I usually enjoy. So there's a lot of really, you know, interesting historical mysteries out there to be read. This is not one of them. Please don't read it. It was unquestionably the worst book I read this year. I wanted to get this sort of more ranty, I didn't go into full rant mode on any of this, but just some of the more like negative stuff out of the way, because mostly at the end of the year, I want to embrace the good things that I read. And, you know, I want to mention the disappointments because I do think it's important. I think for you to understand my taste or understand where I'm coming from as a reader, it's important for you to know what doesn't work for me, because sometimes I have people I follow who essentially I follow them because what they don't like, I do like. So I think it's important for you to know that kind of stuff about my reading taste. Just like in general on BookTube, I think negativity is an important factor, but at the same time, I don't want to just like dwell in it. So I wanted to put this out there, but starting on Friday, we're going to mostly be talking about my favorites of the year, which will be a lot of fun. That being said, definitely let me know if you read any books that weren't just disappointments, but you thought were actually bad, which is what this list is kind of trying to focus on. Let me know maybe one of the worst ones you read this year, because again, I do like to, you know, at least have that as a data point on my radar for books that maybe I'm thinking about reading. So feel free to leave that in the comments. But yeah, other than that, I hope you enjoyed this video. And if you did, please like, subscribe, follow me on the social medias if you are so inclined. I have all that information listed in the description box below. And I will just talk to you soon. Bye!